UN reforms, particularly UN Security Council reforms. In the context of the Security Council reforms, so many proposals are made, and they are contradictory proposals. Okay. And what is of interesting in some of the reforms proposed is that I find some of the reforms suggested, they don't actually contribute to strengthening UN, but in fact they undermine UN. So I find many times people don't really understand the rationale of the structure of UN. Rationale of the structure. And what contributes to UN strength and what undermines UN strength. I don't think people are even clear, going by the suggestions they make, what the purpose of UN is for. So let us make the structure and the purpose clear. See, the international system is anarchical. Anarchy, which means there is no hierarchy, no world government, no international law that can force countries to behave in a particular way. There is no hierarchy, no world government, and no international law. There is anarchy. Okay. And so how do you create an order where there is some control over nations? How do you create an order? That is the issue. Because it is anarchical condition. Why should a nation come under control system at all? It can walk out. It can say that is not in my interest. Okay, so that is an issue. In an earlier structure called League of Nations, formed after First World War, USA did not join, though it was Woodrow Wilson, the USA president, who was behind the idea. American Senate did not approve. Because USA did not join, it was very ineffective. USA did not join because it thought that it would be obliged to fight, obliged to take part in wars if some foreign states under League of Nations ask it to do. So basically, it feared that it won't have control. Okay. So it is out. In the UN, one very important thing that is great powers are assured so that they will not walk out is that they are assured that their basic interests will be met. They will not be forced. By others. So it is in this context, veto power is given to the powers. So veto power is given to certain countries to say, please be inside UN. Don't go out. And don't wreck UN. If it is working fundamentally against you, you can exercise your veto. In many discussions, I find this, some people take veto as a kind of a giving importance to countries, something like weighed vote. Weighed vote. Weighed vote is different from veto. Weighed vote is, it says that somebody is more important and so its weight carries, its vote carries more weight. IMF goes by weighed vote. World Bank goes by weighed vote. But veto is not like that. Veto is not about giving importance to that country, but rather asking the country that don't wreck the system. Don't wreck. Be a part. You don't have to be afraid. Afraid. Okay. So that when core interests are threatened by international organization, the nations can apply veto. Okay. So that is the significance of the veto power. So what does it mean? Veto, more veto is undermining if there is more veto and more countries have veto, UN is undermined. Okay. So if there are more countries with veto power, UN is undermined. Because veto means you don't have to follow UN. But why is it given? Because of the powerlessness of the international system. So if they are not given veto, they will not take part. That is why veto is given. But to the extent that they use veto, UN is undermined. Unfortunately, many people don't understand this simple point. So some propose more countries with veto powers. So whoever is proposing more countries and to have more veto powers they are not proposing the strengthening of the UN, but weakening of the UN. So they say these 5 countries represented power at one time, and now others have become powerful. So others also should be given veto power. No. That undermines UN. What is important if you want to make UN more representative is not to give more countries veto power, but rather reduce veto power. This strengthens UN. So this is not the solution. This is the solution. So some people want more veto power, some people do want getting rid of veto power. Both of them are wrong. More veto power undermines UN. If you remove veto power, UN existence is at threat. So what is important is let veto power be there, but how to reduce? Which means there can be fewer vetoes or vetoes only under certain circumstances. Okay, or having to explain veto in General Assembly. Explain veto in a General Assembly rather than simply cast it in Security Council. Okay. Or veto can be overcome in certain circumstances. Okay, by General Assembly. It means qualified veto. So what is important is to strengthen UN, you need to reduce veto power. This is a very, very important provision. So there are 2 things we should avoid talking. Get rid of veto, that is not possible. That affects UN itself. And increase number of countries with veto. That undermines this. Okay. Next, another thing is more number of permanent members in UNSC. More permanent members. I don't think even this is very important. Why should you make a number more permanent? He can be elected. You can increase the number of elected seats, but you don't have to increase the number of permanent seats. Because if a country is being permanent means for the given number, other countries are being excluded. But why should it be so? So that is why a lot of suggested reforms think in terms of some countries have power, some that is P5 have power, let others also have something of P5. Something of P5. So some countries have power, P5 have. And reforming UN means other countries also be like P5. This is a wrong approach. Reforming UN means not make more countries as P5, but rather reduce the power of P5. And which also means, apart from veto power, reduce the number of permanent members. That is, at least don't increase. Okay. So, UN reforms, conceptual flaw in many of the suggested reforms is that there is P5 based on 1945 power structure. Okay. Now others are powerful. So let others also be close to P5. This is the basic conceptually wrong argument. Okay. P5 was historical necessity. Even now there is some necessity. And so create structures by which UN is powerful, not some nations. So as you create structures that are closer to P5, you are undermining UN. Okay, so that is the point. So how can you make it more representative? You can include, you can go for more number of elected seats. This one, more number of elected seats. So this is how United Nations Security Council can be made more representative. This is the only way. Everything else undermines. Okay. Next, let us look at closely P5. Okay. P5 at the time of formation of UN, there were, this is how P5 came. There were actually only three important countries, powerful countries: US, USSR, and Britain. Three powerful. Okay. But US brought China to make it more representative. The China at that time was not communist China. It was China, and later Taiwan used to represent China, but now it no longer. And Britain brought France. France also is a victor in World War II. So all five are not equally powerful. So Britain represented old power, US new power, and USSR new power. Okay. If you see closely, what happens in P5 is that it is not really five independent countries taking different positions. The world power structure, if the world is bipolar, then P5 will also be bipolar. If the world is multipolar, then P5 will also be multipolar. Or veto yielding powers will also be. How is it like that? It is because countries gang up, they take position, and when the other countries don't agree, they apply veto. So as of now, USA, UK, France are on one side. China, Russia is another side. So one need not think in terms of 5. These are just 2. This is emerging challenger. This was old challenger. And USA wants to contain China. So, because UN doesn't represent world government, you need to have a system where one bloc has the power to veto. So this is appropriate. In fact, some people would say it is 1945. That is not completely true. Even now, this is true. It's like this. And more importantly, China of 1945 is different from China now. So they gave power, they gave permanent seat to China simply to make it more representative, not because it was so powerful. But then it became powerful, representing a particular pole, and so this veto yielding UNSC is up to date. Though they didn't plan that China would one day be as powerful. So the idea that UNSC veto is outdated is not true. It represents bipolar world as of now. This is good. Okay. Doesn't matter, UK is not so powerful, France is not so powerful, but all 3 belong to a power bloc. And China is another, and Russia is another. So it is not that it is outdated. This is still valid. Okay. So, what is the current problem with the working of United Nations Security Council? Current problem. The reason why people talk about reforms is that there are many serious cases of genocide. Example, Syria, Yugoslavia, Rwanda. Okay. Some power or the other use the veto and block action. So essentially, there is a problem and there is a solution, but somebody is applying veto power to block any action. Syria is the most recent case. Okay, so UNSC reforms can more specifically thought in terms of how to overcome this particular problem. And suggestion is how to reduce this veto power. That solution is how to reduce this veto power. Okay. So this is how one can think. But on the whole, let us look at what is the what are the kinds of issues that the world faces. Or what is it that the UN should do? I would say these are all the tasks that the UN should do. Prevent war between great powers. Prevent. This is one. Second, if one great power is or one big country is trying to is aggressive against a small power, then prevent. Okay. And third, intra-state conflict. Okay. How do you deal with intra-state conflict? It can be ethnic conflict. It can be political conflict. And third, how do you protect people from their own countries, some group, what is called human rights issue. So we can say these are the 4 important tasks of United Nations. Of course, this is very, very important. Prevent war between great powers. UN, in fact, after World War II, there is no war between the great powers. This is a very, very good thing. But this may not be because of UN, maybe because of simply nuclear weapons. This one. Okay. So when something like this is happening, UN can pass a resolution and then prevent this. Iraq versus Kuwait. So this also is considerably came down, but intrastate conflict increased. Intrastate. The problem with intrastate conflict is that UN operates on nation-state principle, but conflicting groups are within a state. So a president may not represent the entire state, or a prime minister may not represent the entire state. It is simply representing a group. And this also is intrastate in a way. Majority is taking away the rights of certain minorities. So how do you prevent these issues? So which means that what you call a nation here is not legitimate. And here, to the extent that you make nation more important, you make people suffer more. So United Nations has to think of not only 1 and 2, but also 3 and 4. So which means UN should be in a position to look at the issue of national sovereignty. To what extent this should be given importance, and how to puncture this sovereignty to protect people of its own country, their own country. So that is, how do you protect people from their own governments? This is also an important issue. Okay. Strengthening UN should also mean strengthening people and reducing the power of the nation. Strengthening people and reducing the power of the nation. So this is how we need to think in terms of UN reforms. So when we have this clarity, we can see whether we are strengthening UN or weakening UN. Take case of India. Okay. India wants to be a seat in United Nations Security Council on a permanent basis. And it also wants a veto. So if India is given a veto, will it create a better India or better world? I'm not sure. So far, India was using USSR to exercise veto on any Kashmir resolution. So far, India used USSR to apply veto on any Kashmir resolution. Now, if it becomes a permanent member with a veto, it doesn't have to depend on others. It will apply resolution. So, does it mean creating a better world? Okay, then India says that they have a big population, they have a big economy, and so they have a say. at a high table. This argument is similar to you are big, you have certain powers, and so I deserve. The problem is their powers are undermining UN. USA has used veto in so many times to block resolutions against Israel. So USA's use of veto to block resolutions against Israel undermines UN. Russia's veto to block resolutions on Syria undermines UN. In the same way, if India is given its resolutions, it will block veto on resolutions on Kashmir, it will undermine UN. So India's argument, now that I have become more powerful, that we represent huge population and so we deserve to be like this, that is to create more problems for UN. Okay, so we need to think in terms of how to strengthen the nations, but rather how to strengthen UN and how to strengthen people, how to protect people from nations, from their own nations. This is what we should do. At least this clarity should be there when you say this is how UN should be reformed. Okay. Now I'll suggest certain steps where really powerful UN can be created. I would say develop independent financial powers, carbon tax. Okay, given the problem of climate change, this is very important for climate, and UN will have funds. Tobin tax. Tobin tax is a tax proposed on capital movement, capital across the nations. So these two will develop financial powers to UN. And with the financial powers, it can take more peacekeeping operations because there are many countries who are willing to contribute to peacekeeping. Okay, so it can take up law and order issues, and by having independent financial resources, it will depend less on nations. Now nations contribute on the basis of GDP. So they will contribute plus additionally this. But I think on the whole, the world became less anarchical because of globalization, media, global media, less anarchical. And less anarchical means UN will have more power than nations. So UN now has more powers to control nations. Okay, so we should think in terms of how to keep the nations in place to the extent we can. Okay, ultimately it cannot, because after all, UN cannot go beyond great powers. Okay, but as much as possible, how do you create UN which is not vulnerable to the power of nations or power of great nations, great powers. Okay. So, and I think one very important resolution about one very important and another thing is about transparency. I think at any time one of the P5 exercises veto, let it explain, because of globalization and media explosion, a country will find it more difficult to explain itself. Okay, so for example, if US blocks a resolution on Israel, let US explain its position in General Assembly. So it will make US think twice. And another proposal is that let the conflicting parties come to General Assembly and speak, give their position. Conflicting parties, not the nations. Imagine India wants to apply a veto asking Russia on Kashmir. Imagine that after that, India has to explain why, or Russia has to explain why it applied veto. And Kashmiri leaders explain their stand and their problems. I think that would create a far better world than what it is now. So, it is very important to understand that strengthening UN is not strengthening a nation, but rather weakening it. Strengthening UN should be strengthening the marginalized, vulnerable people, not nations. And veto is not like an expression of how important that country is. Veto is simply to protect UN from the importance of that country, to the extent that you can ignore its economic and political and its power of numbers. China claiming we have 1 billion plus, India claiming 1 billion plus. It just doesn't matter. We have this GDP, just doesn't matter. How are marginal and weak people in China are suffering? How are they suffering in India? And UN is to be concerned about that. So if a country claims that we are such a big country and we have such a huge power, we are such GDP, then UN should think, oh my God, how do you protect your people from you? This clarity should be there when you think in terms of reforming UN. Thank you.